As I meditated on the gospel for this Sunday, I couldn't help but remember a scene in a certain movie where the main character is being followed by a beggar, but to his great surprise, he finds himself unable to lie and forced to tell the truth. It goes something like this. "Any change, mister?" "Absolutely." "Could you spare some?" "Yes, I could." "Well, will you?" "How come?" "Because I believe you will buy booze with it. Plus, I'm cheap and an inconsiderate person." I'm sorry to say that on more than one occasion, you probably could have taken those words out of my mouth. So it is very sobering to hear our Lord tell in the gospel about a man who went to eternal torment in hell for being a very cheap, selfish, inconsiderate person. And with this powerful parable, I believe our Lord is challenging us to live simply so that others can simply live. Again, the challenge to live simply so that others can simply live, and so that we can live with them later in heaven. Now, the first step towards this goal would be to recognize the threat of intemperance, to recognize our own tendency to intemperance. With our fallen human nature, we have this tendency to overdo it when it comes to earthly pleasures. When something tastes or feels good, we naturally want more of it, but we can all too easily take it beyond healthy limits. Serving size, 2 cookies. Who in the world eats 2 cookies? They must have meant 2 sleeves, right? Wait until marriage. What do you mean, wait until marriage? They must have meant wait until we're really in love, right? When intemperance is applied to food and drink, we recognize it as the capital sin of gluttony, right? When intemperance is applied to bodily intimacy, we recognize it as the capital sin of lust. But intemperance can apply to a great many things: video games, TV, shopping, sports. And when we allow ourselves to go beyond reasonable limits, then all too easily we can arrive at full-blown addiction, right? We can end up addicted to eating, addicted to drugs, addicted to impurity, right? The more we give in to this insatiable desire for more and more created goods, the more they end up taking over us. And we take this to the extreme, we arrive at the philosophies of materialism and hedonism. Materialism, where we see the only true goods as the earthly material goods, and we end up neglecting our spiritual good or that of others. And hedonism, where we come to believe that happiness is synonymous with as much pleasure as possible. And the natural result of this way of thinking is gross neglect of God and neighbor. When we make pleasure our life's goal, when we have such deep commitment to comfort at all costs, then we end up grossly neglecting God and neighbor. In the first reading, the prophet Amos accuses the people of God of being so wrapped up in their lives of luxury that they don't even notice that the kingdom is collapsing around them. They have no concern for the glory of God's holy city. And in the gospel, that rich man is so committed to his own comfort and pleasure that he has become blind to the needs of his neighbor. He is no longer able to see a suffering brother. There's the denial of his humanity. Perhaps he sees Lazarus as little more than an obstacle to getting in and out of his house. The warning is clear. If we are not working actively against intemperance, if we instead indulge it and make comfort the ultimate goal of our life, then this is where we will arrive. Grave sins of omission. Sins of omission. This is the type of sin that we refer to at the beginning of Mass in the Confiteor when we accuse ourselves of the sins of what I have failed to do. The rich man failed to relieve the suffering of someone he obviously could have helped. He could have invited him in to share his meals, or at least given him those plentiful leftovers. He could have spent a little less money on that expensive clothing. The color purple was the most expensive at that time. He could have used some of that money to buy medicine or doctors to care for Lazarus. But no, he couldn't care less if Lazarus died. And as much as we might like to think that only a few people might get that bad, no, we're in humility, we're called to recognize any one of us could get that bad. And we see on a national level, our nation is full of people. There's a lot of people out there who are grossly neglecting God. Right? They've turned away from Him, kicked Him out of their lives, and because of this, they have gotten to the point where they couldn't care less about the death of the unborn, or the elderly, or the handicapped. I was disturbed to learn recently at the Life Choice Pregnancy Center there in Russellville. They had their benefit dinner, and the gynecologist speaker, he mentioned that now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, there is a lot more push to making abortion available by means of pills that can be ordered online so that it can be made available to women in states where it is no longer legal. And he mentioned several of the complications that are more easily overlooked with this. And that would be another homily. But suffices to say that so much threat to these women's health, but abortion makes too much money for some people to care about that. This is how bad it can get. Hopefully this motivates us to live the virtue of temperance. Right? To embrace that virtue of temperance. Temperance is the virtue that enables us to be moderate in the use and pleasure of created goods. Again, temperance or self-control is the virtue, that good, stable habit that enables us to be moderate in the use and pleasure of created goods. It's not that pleasure is bad or evil. We recognize pleasure is good. It's meant to be a reward for doing good, healthy things like eating, drinking, working, recreating, procreating. Money also we recognize is not evil, right? It's the love of money, covetousness, making it an idol, using it only to indulge ourselves that can make it evil. And so temperance allows us to use money and to welcome pleasure appropriately. We want to regularly practice saying no to our impulses so that they never gain control over us. We never lose control. When we practice temperance, our hearts are open to solidarity. What's solidarity? Solidarity was the word especially used by Pope St. John Paul II to refer to this sense that we're all in this together. Right? The ability to see others as brothers, to recognize others as children of God in need of our help, that God has made us dependent on one another, meant to help each other at different times. This sense of responsibility for others. An example that comes to mind is health share programs. Some people, instead of having traditional health insurance, they're members of health share programs where their monthly payment amount gets sent to another member of the program who has a medical need but is not able to provide for it all themselves. And so people are sharing one another's burdens. There's one called Samaritan International. There's another one called, by that word, Solidarity. Whether we're members of such programs or not, we want to embrace this idea, this sense that, yes, we are all in this together. So what are some ways that we can all practice temperance and solidarity? One that comes to mind is, well, the most basic: share what you have, right? Share what you have. We want to instill this in our children in a young age, whether it's a bowl of watermelon or a sleeve of those cookies, to share it with others. Would you like one of my cookies, right? Or when it comes to games, would you like to take a turn, right? And we want to reward them for sharing. There was that little song in a movie I saw as a kid: the more you share, the more you're gonna get. Right? We want to reward sharing with others. A second idea that comes to mind is donate what you're not using. Donate what you don't use. Look at the things in your house and the things in your closet. If you haven't used it in more than a year, then it could probably be used by someone else. There was a saint who said, the bread that you do not eat is the bread of your neighbor. The coat hanging in your wardrobe is the coat of your neighbor who has none. The shoes that you do not use are those of your neighbor who walks around barefoot. So yes, donate what we don't use. And we can help instill this in our children also by having a limit on the number of toys. I read that Pope St. John Paul II, when he was still Cardinal Wojtyla, not yet Pope, in 1976, he visited the U.S. for the first time. And he was a person who lived gospel poverty very heroically himself. He was not used to seeing the great wealth that many of us enjoy in the U.S. And when he went to bless the home of a Polish friend, he recognized, even though it was kind of a disaster, things around the place, he said, that's a sign of a happy household. But he was astonished by the number of toys. He was thinking, how could two children have so many toys? How could they need so many toys? He said, for a whole nursery, yes, but this, wow. So maybe pick a number, 5 or so good toys that our kids really enjoy, or it could be a set, right? Hot Wheels, right? We can include that all as one toy or one set. But when they're crying for something in the store, okay, well, you already have your 5 or so toys. Are you willing to donate one of them to a child who has no toys so that you can have this new one? And maybe they're like, okay, well, yeah, I've had a lot of good memories with this toy. Maybe another child can enjoy it, and they are able to donate that, sacrifice it, and have this new one. Or maybe they're like, no way, no, I'm not getting rid of those toys. Okay, well, maybe they don't want this new one as much as they think, right? How many parents have they bought a toy for a child who was crying for it, making us embarrassed there maybe in the store, and then a few weeks later, they never play with it again, right? So a good thing to teach them, a limit on our toys. Adults too, limiting your toys, your gadgets, right? Different things we might want to buy, but ask the question, do I really need it? Right? Can I justify a good use for it to help me in my job or in my vocation? Right? A third plan would be to set aside money for charity, right? To plan your giving. Right? If we just have in general, I'll give at some points, but we haven't planned it out, it can be all too easy to forget about it. So at a certain point during the year, plan how much are we going to give this year, include it as part of the budget. Yes, it's okay to have part of the budget for savings, part of it for recreation, and let's have a part for charity. We can choose perhaps some of those nonprofit organizations that send the mailings to our home. And here I recognize, yes, this can be very overwhelming. As Treasurer General, my box gets full of these appeals for charity. And there was one time, it was a picture of a child on the front, and it said, "Go ahead, throw me away, I'm used to it." It can be heartbreaking, the fact that, yes, there are so many good groups, and we can't donate to them all, but we can try to pick maybe 1 to 4 that really speak to our heart and donate to those. It could be abused or neglected children, There's Mercy Home for boys and girls. There's Covenant House and others like that. It could be to feed the hungry, food for the poor. It could be pro-life groups that help women in those crisis pregnancies. Heartbeat International, Life Choice Pregnancy Center there in Russellville. There's the Pregnancy Center in Bowling Green and Franklin. It could be helping those in developing countries, right, to have water, or helping refugees. Right? We want to discern where we could put our money to good use. How much do we give? C.S. Lewis, I think, gives us a good thing to keep in mind here. C.S. Lewis, the English author, wrote, "I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I am afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare." What does that mean? Right? To give more than we can spare. In other words, if our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they are too small. There ought to be things that we should like to do and cannot because our charitable expenditure excludes them. So more than we can spare doesn't mean that we are living in destitution, not able to provide for the needs of our family, but I think this is a good thing to keep in mind, that the extra spending, right, the recreational spending, right, the idea that there should be things we're not able to do because we are setting aside a good amount for charity. Right, let it pinch a little bit, let it hurt a little bit. And that's a good sign that we are donating close to what we should be. Fourth thing is to look for Lazarus. Right, don't just set aside money for charity, but time and energy for charity. Look for those in need around us. Archimandrite Roman Braga, a monastic from Romania living in the U.S., says this: "There is a mentality in the U.S. that writing your monthly check to a charitable society can put your conscience at ease. There is something lost when you have no personal and thus spiritual connection with the people you help. Here, you never even know the people you help because your gift is made in the abstract. If you write your check for charity, you can sleep well, even if in the hospital a person dies or your neighbor is in need. Maybe they do not need your money, but they do need your smile and comfort." So we can look around. Perhaps there's a homeless shelter we can volunteer at, a soup kitchen. Perhaps visit the elderly in the nursing homes who might be very lonely, helping the elderly in our community. We could mow someone's lawn. We can volunteer for that golf cart we asked about a few weeks ago, right? To, before the start of Mass, help those handicapped and elderly to make it easier to the church here, to the chapel at the start of Mass. Life Choice Pregnancy Center. It would have been great to see more Catholics at that benefit dinner. And we can call up and ask, are there any items I can donate or ways that I can help there? Right? It would be good to try to find something like that to do at least once a month, right? To be present to someone in need. There might be the question at this point, what about panhandlers? What about those on the street with the signs asking for money? Is that Lazarus? Right? Is that someone that we can obviously help? I have no definite answer here. There's different things we might hear. Some say that, no, you should never give to them. Others say, well, yes, you should always give to them. Some say, well, there are safer ways to give. Give to the food shelters that help out, St. Vincent de Paul and others. Some say, it's just, you never know if they're going to use the money for the appropriate purpose. I've heard of some groups that they'll make sandwiches. There was a Catholic group at a Newman Center that would make sandwiches and go and offer them to people. Right? Are you hungry? I can ask, are you hungry? Can I give you this meal? Right? And it's made with love. That's a beautiful thing. Right? Whether we discern to give or not, I think it's good to examine our heart in these instances. Right? Do we give into rash judgment that, oh yeah, they're probably just a drug addict or someone's going to use it for booze? Examine our heart for selfishness. Right? Is it really that we just don't want to give? We don't want to be asked at all. Examine our heart for pride. The thought that, no way could I get taken advantage of. I won't settle for that at all. So we end up neglecting perhaps those who really do need the help because we don't want to give it any thought. Right? Examine our heart. I like what one of our priests says. He tells people, at your judgment, God's not going to say, you know that person on the street that you gave money to? Well, they actually went and used it for drugs or alcohol, so you get no points for that. No, right? We're still going to be rewarded in heaven. Right? It's still a form of almsgiving. We were seeing Jesus in that person. Right? In all of these things, let us keep in mind the words of St. John Chrysostom. He said, do you want to honor Christ's body? Then do not scorn him in his nakedness, nor honor him here in the church with silken garments, while neglecting him outside where he is cold and naked. For he who said, this is my body, and made it so by his words, also said, you saw me hungry and did not feed me. And inasmuch as you did not do it for one of these, the least of my brothers, you did not do it for me. Do not, therefore, adorn the church and ignore your afflicted brother, for he is the most precious temple of all.